Hi everybody, welcome to our final session in the Engaging Families in Maths and Numeracy series. Today we're going to focus on how families can support maths and numeracy at home, what resources, apps are out there and how it links to the classroom. Again, I'm delighted to say that we have Jo with us from UCL. Who'll be leading the session, and I'm sure it will be as informative and enjoyable as the last two. So thanks, Jo, for joining us and sharing your expertise again.
Thank you very much, and thank you again for having me today. As already mentioned, today I'll talk a little bit more about improving outcomes for children with mathematical learning difficulties, but also the tasks I'm going to be talking about will help all children's mathematical development. So I'm going to focus particularly a little bit more on my own research today than maybe I've done in the previous sessions, and talk about some of the games we designed for children aged 0 to 5, but they can be used with slightly older children, especially if these children have some mathematical learning difficulties. These can be used at home as well as in the classroom. And I'll also talk a little bit around our latest research, which focuses on educational apps with a focus on mathematical apps, and what we found in terms of what you could look out for if you want to look for an app that can help children develop mathematical abilities, in terms of what kind of features and components these apps should have. A little bit of backtracking what I've mentioned in the last two sessions already. So we know in the UK, for example, that 20% of the 5-year-old children don't achieve the expected attainment for mathematics. We can ask around why that matters, but I hopefully have shown you already in previous sessions that strong early mathematical skills are central to later educational outcomes. We also know that a lot of children these days have touchscreen tablet devices, so over 70%. Of course, there are some differences depending on the area that people live, as well as socioeconomic status from the parents. If you look at which apps are getting downloaded in terms of parental apps, the preschool-aged children are the largest group for which there are apps being downloaded. And we know there's a bit of a demonstrated benefit of apps. But it's a little bit of mixed evidence in terms of, how much can these apps help. So that's why later on I want to tell you a little bit about our latest research. So just to show you that, that we do have a little bit of a difficulty with maths development in the early years. In the first session, we talked about, the core components of mathematical development, and one of the items or the areas we talked about was number sense, which, as you may remember, is this ability to very quickly understand which one is larger, or also your ability to estimate around, how large is a number, as well as, understanding how numbers relate to each other. So in terms of number line, where does 3 go, where does 9 go? And being able to put numbers in a right order in terms of the amount or what they represent. So this all relates to kind of your number sense. I'll come back to this ratio picture in terms of the fact that your number sense very much is impacted on by the ratio between the numbers or the amounts represented. So for example, you can have a ratio of 1:2, which is represented here, and it's very easy then to see, it's an easy ratio to see there's more trees, for example, than pandas, or that there's more apples than trees. Compared to, for example, when a ratio is 4:5, it's more difficult to see how many ghosts are there, and are there more or fewer ghosts than turtles, and are there more or fewer turtles than pencils, without counting, or seeing this very quickly. We also know that there is a second number system that is important, and that's around, your symbolic knowledge, or number knowledge itself, that relates to transcoding. So also not only number knowledge and symbolic knowledge, but also linking that to the names of the symbols. So we're thinking here around, counting names, digit recognition, linking counting names to digit recognition, which is the transcoding, as well as cardinality, which we talked about in the first session. It's about knowing what counting is for. And if I show you, for example, 4 dots, that it's 4, and what that means in terms of its fourness, if there's something like that. We mentioned already before the domain general knowledge that is important in terms of, visuospatial abilities. We talked in the first session around how Lego might help with this, how video games might help children develop their visuospatial abilities, so their awareness of how you move around in space and how things relate to each other in space. As well as, therefore roaming around outside, reading maps can all help with visuospatial abilities. I've only briefly touched upon it, and on reflection, I wish I had said a little bit more around language maybe in that first session, because actually one thing to reflect on might be around maths vocabulary, around how many specific vocabulary terms children need to know in order to be good at maths. Things like even understanding in the number line, you go up, down, under, over, in between. It's plus, minus, it's more, it's less, it's fewer than. There's so many words or vocabulary that relates to mathematical development, as well as stories. But I've given you a link to a blog I wrote about maths and vocabulary and stories that hopefully you'll find interesting. I know you had a great session with Rebecca yesterday around attention, working memory, and inhibition, and we talked about that as well. But most of all, we also know, and talked about that in the first session, is around how much anxiety or a love for maths matters as well. So, we know that having fun, being motivated is also a core factor of developing mathematical development. So what happened is that we developed in 2013, maybe longer ago, some games. And there's two types of games. First, we developed some plus games. These are games that are developed to support the number sense, so your non-symbolic estimation. These games were developed for preschoolers, so for the age of 3 to 5 years old, but we've also done them now with younger children and with slightly older children who have, especially older children who have mathematical learning difficulties. And I'll show you a little bit later on around how we found in our research that these games really help. So in the plus games, which are to develop estimation, to help develop the non-symbolic core system of mathematical development. So in these games, there's some comparison games and there's some estimation games, but they are based upon two core principles. One is that we want to prevent the child from counting. And so we do this often by presenting stimuli or what we want the child to do only very briefly, or by making children compete either with each other or competing with an adult. And the other thing is about improving these ratios. So I showed you that a ratio of 1 and 2 is easier than 4 and 5. So what we know is that babies around 6 months can discriminate between amounts when the ratio is 1 and 2, but not between 1 and 3, for example. And we know that adults can do 4 and 5, but it's not always easy. So in between all these different ratios that fall in between is what children develop between the age of, say, for example, 9 months and, adulthood or, early adolescence.
That's good.
So basically what we're trying to do in these games is make children familiar with ratios and then increase the difficulty as children get better in these games. And I just want to show you a few bits of how these games work. So the other reasoning behind these games when we developed was that these games should be offline. So although I'm going to talk about apps later on, these games are things you do with children in the classroom, at home, with physical objects, face-to-face. They're supposed to be fun, short, so we would say 5 to 10 minutes is enough. And they should slot into daily practice to avoid parents and teachers feeling that this is something formal that you should be doing, because we talked about how important non-formal, informal activities are for mathematical development. One word on feedback. So because we wanted children to prevent them from counting, but also because we knew already that in young children, and especially children who have are at risk for mathematical learning difficulties, anxiety is a key factor. We wanted to make sure that we didn't increase anxiety, and that we want to encourage children to estimate and use their comparison skills. So the way of doing this is by using lots of praise. And rather than saying that's right or wrong, because sometimes children did make mistakes, saying things like, oh, that's a very good guess, but I think that, and then show them what the right answer is, rather than saying, nope, that's wrong, I think, that's the right answer. Or asking other children what they thought. So if a child said, oh, I think it's the answer, to ask another child, that's a great choice. What do you think? And ask another child to see what they were thinking. So we didn't count to check any answers. And that's very important with these games. So, for example, one of the games we played, for which you need special cards, but again, I can provide those PDFs if you like, if you're interested in that. So in these cards, these cards all had dots on them, on either side of the line. And one side always had fewer dots than the other. And as you can see, we played around with the configuration so that it's not how much black you see on the particular card. It's about, looking at the amount of dots that are presented on the card. So first we taught the child about the cards. One side has more than the other, for example, in this case, green. And then we asked children to make a long snake of the cards, matching more with more and few with few. So as you can see here, this side has more dots than this side, and so therefore it goes with this side rather than with that side. This one has fewer than that one, so it will go with this one because it has fewer than that side. And here you can see a child who's made a very long snake. And that's again what happened in our preschool where we did the research, is that children were very creative with this. We had races between two groups of children. We had children making snakes from indoor to outdoor to under the chairs, under the tables. And children, although this is a very simple game in terms of, there's not much to it, children really enjoyed this one. And it's kind of supporting this ratio development and estimating where is more very quickly, because that we were making them race, making a longer snake as soon as possible. And this is again how we looked at the ratios, for example. So a ratio of 1 and 2 would be 6 dots versus 12 dots and 10 dots versus 5 dots, which is very easy to see where there's more. And then over time, we made this more difficult. So for example, here there's 11 dots and 12 dots and 9 dots and 8 dots. And of course, this is very, very difficult. But again, we never went back to ask the child to count. We just encouraged them to do as best as they could. Another game that we developed, which is similar, is called In a Line.
I'm going to give you a little amount, okay? Now, can you find one that's got more than your crowns, Clem? Well done. And Vari, can you find one that has more than your dogs? Very good. Very good. Can you find one that has more than your birds? I'm going to give you...
Okay, I hope you could hear this. So basically the children are learning to make a number line, but rather than with digits, they're just making this number line with sets of items, all of different items. And as you could see, Clem here, who was one of our older children, so she was 5, and then can't remember what her name was, she was only 2. And she was making her number line the wrong way around. And Clem at the beginning, at some point, put the number on the wrong side of her number line and then corrected herself. And this was very early on when we started to play these games, and they became really good at developing an understanding of fewer items go towards the left, more items towards the right, and just developing that number line there. Another game that we played is called In Sock. So we were hiding some beads of different sizes, so children couldn't just feel like, oh, heavier means there's more in there, because they actually had to feel where there would be more. We did this very quickly. So, for example...
So we have some beads here and some beads here. Now I'm going to mix the socks. Are you ready?
Yeah, I'm going.
Mix, 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 mix. Can you touch that one? Can you touch that one? Where is more? Here or here? Where? Here. Okay. So now mix, 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 mix.
I need a
mix, mix. Can you touch that one? Can you feel it? Well done, make it. So now we'll do the same with that one. Where is more? That's it. So we have.
And then what she did is she showed that indeed visually there was more in one sock than in another, but again there was no counting involved. Sorry. This is all based on a similar principle, so I'll just do this one as well, which is called grab and guess. So we had, and you can play this with either pasta, but I know, it's not always possible with children, so you can also do this with, for example, any kind of toys. And children, we have to change this a little bit in terms of the instructions. So the idea is that children grab one amount, and then the adult or the other child grabs another amount, and then children cover theirs. And then 1, 2, 3, they both uncover it at the same time and have to say very quickly who's got more or who's got less, because otherwise what happened was children were just grabbing everything. So you can play around with this in terms of where is more, where is less. Mix the pasta into different shapes, different sizes. So again, it's not if you see more that there is necessarily more. It's more about really looking at the amount of what there is in terms of items. And the reason why it's actually better to do this with an adult rather than 2 children is so that the adult goes second and kind of manipulate the amounts a little bit so that the ratios, so that the task becomes harder as children become better at this game. But you don't always need to use materials to develop mathematical abilities. There's actually a lot that you could use in your environment and helping children to, we call it guessing, but it's more an estimation game. So for example, if you look at this preschool environment, you could ask children questions and say, right, what do you think? Are there more blue chairs or yellow chairs? And ask children, to say, who can do this first? And see who gives the fastest answer. And as you can see, I haven't counted them, but I think there's more blue chairs than yellow chairs. But we can also look like, do you think there's more pictures on the red board than on the green board, and do this very quickly. So there's lots in your environment that you can use to help children develop their mathematical abilities. For example, you go to the shop, you're queuing to at the till, people have items put on the till, and you can kind of say, well, who do you think has got more? Is it us or the person in front of us? So this kind of estimation skill, you can use this anywhere you are basically and develop it that way, by just making sure that children don't get the time or the ability to count the items, but need to kind of estimate. And it's never about right or wrong. It's all about, I think that's a good guess. I would say I guess it's the same, rather than saying let's count, to really develop this ability for children that it's okay to estimate sometimes. We need in mathematical development sometimes to estimate items. So those were a few of our plus games. In terms of digit games, these were games where we looked at promoting to count, at promoting children's symbolic understanding, and also the transcoding between understanding the link between a symbol and what that means in terms of the name of that symbol, as well as also cardinality, so understanding how many items there are. And again, we started very easy with, just a few numbers and then increased it over time. So for example, we know that young children can often count to 3 or can recognize at least their own age in terms of the number, the symbol or the digit, and then increase it to maybe go up to 5, go up to 10, 15 and 20 and etc. So a few of the games that were involved with this is, we just sang nursery rhymes with them so that they kind of develop their the number name knowledge and the order of these number names. As you might remember from our first session, it's important in terms of developing counting to kind of have that stable order principle and knowing which ones are the number names. We also had lots of number cards and asked children to count as quickly as they could how many items there were. So this is kind of a game that develops cardinality. But, you can also count actions. So this was one thing that children could do outside when they were outside. So how many times can you jump? How many times can you touch your head? How many times can you snap your fingers? This one was an interesting one because lots of the preschoolers found this really difficult and they really liked practicing that one until they could do it. But again, you could use the environment for highlighting all the different hidden digits that you might have in an environment in terms of at home or in the classroom as well as in books. So there's a number of books where, you can have numbers in them, so which we used. as well as the digit snake. And this is very similar to the number line game we've seen before, where, you know, it was with non-symbolic items, but in this case, the children had to develop the number line with the cards.
Now look at the numbers. We're going to try to put all of them in order, okay? So we can do it together. No, you can do it. We'll do it together. So look, which
So he's saying that will be hard.
number goes first? Yes. Fantastic. And then, well done. And then, what number goes in? Fantastic. That's okay. I'll get it for you. I can. It's okay. Don't worry. Okay. Well done. Thank you. Okay. We've got 1, 2, 3. What comes next? 4. Well done. And then 5. And then what comes next? 6. Well done. And then 7. Good job. And then 12. And then 8. And then 9. And then what's that last number?
10.
So as you can see, he found it really difficult, or he said it's going to be difficult. This was a child with mathematical learning difficulties, but, you know, he was able to do this quite quickly. And of course, we started easy with always starting with number 1, but as you continue playing this game, you could start with any number onwards, right? So at one point, we just then took numbers away and said, well, where would you start now? And they had to maybe start with number 3 or with number 6, etc. But also sometimes we made them make the number line backwards, so that they had to start with a larger number and go down to the lower number. And again, to make it fun for children, sometimes we made them compete either against the researcher or against each other if there was no other child available. So these were just a few of the games rather than showing you all of them. And what we found was that these games really improved children's mathematical abilities. So basically in our research, we had 19 children with mathematical learning difficulties who were playing the plus games. And we had 19 children also with mathematical learning difficulties who played the digit games, as well as a control group of typically developing preschoolers who had no mathematical learning difficulties. These groups were all similar in terms of their chronological age, as well as in their kind of general cognitive ability that we measured using the British Ability Scales. I know that the two groups were slightly lower of the children who were at risk for mathematical learning difficulties compared to the control group. It was not significant, and as you may remember from our second session last week, is that, you know, although these children have good general cognitive abilities, there are some difficulties with working memory and other areas that kind of impact a little bit on their overall performance. In terms of training sessions, so these children, the idea was that these children would have one session of 15 minutes each day for 5 weeks, so 25 sessions. But as happens when you do research in nurseries, not all children are there every day, or not all children wanted to do them, especially the children with, because these children have mathematical learning difficulties. As I mentioned the other day, you know, they like the games, but obviously they're always being challenged every day. They were asked to be doing more. So we made them play these games, as I explained them. So we assessed them at week 0, so before the intervention. Then they had 5 weeks of intervention and we assessed them again. So all children had a minimum of 3 sessions, roughly. A minimum of 10 sessions of 20 minutes. And then again, 25 weeks later, which was when they were after the summer break, we assessed them again. So what we found was that the children, both in the plus and in the digit group, they improved on their non-symbolic abilities. So we assessed this by using an ANS task, which was the task where they had to say very quickly where is more, as well as on a range of counting tasks and a task that measured their overall mathematical ability. So what this showed is that children who were playing the plus games improved on their non-symbolic and symbolic abilities as well. And the digit group again improved in their non-symbolic and symbolic abilities. So basically what our study showed, which previous studies hadn't shown before, is that how these non-symbolic and symbolic abilities really matter in terms of they influence each other. So even if you just improve non-symbolic abilities, children's symbolic abilities will improve and vice versa. And this might be because children are mapping abilities to each other. So kind of mapping the understanding of what is counting for and what does that mean in terms of where numbers go around the number line. So based upon this study, we then didn't do much with that study besides publishing studies and doing some other research. And then obviously COVID-19 hit. And so during COVID-19, what people in my lab and I were doing was on a weekly basis, we redesigned these games to help parents at home to kind of say where you don't have to do formal maths, but these are some activities that you can do with your child at home. And so we designed games like, for example, to help with subitizing, which is math in the bath, to kind of teach children like, well, look, one hand is 5 and another hand is another 5. So let's see how many hands you've got together. And it kind of teaches children to subitize either with fingers, like how much is this, how much is this, how many are these, but also then for the older children to kind of start counting in 5s, right? Like, you know, you've got one hand, another hand, another foot, what if we add mummy's hand, etc. And so we developed games that parents can use for children.
Wait a minute, I'm taking the fucking shot. Can we just make sure that you're muted? Sorry about that.
That's all right. So we did this, and we had a series of games that were posted on our Twitter and Facebook posts. But obviously, it was difficult for parents to keep this as a resource because, you know, in Twitter things go away, and Facebook as well, in terms of finding all the pictures that were made as a slide with all the things. So what we did last year was we developed an app called Maths at Home. And it's a personal bank of ideas of things you can do with children aged 0 to 7 years old in terms of developing their mathematical ability. This is what the app looks like. In that it's got pictures. It tells you where you can play the games, in the bathroom, in the bedroom, in the living room, in the kitchen or eating area. And then once you click on the photo, you kind of get a description of what the game is all about with the instructions, as well as a challenge. So this could be like, if your child can do this level, let's try the next level. So there are several levels in the games to kind of make your child progress, as well as some fun tips. And this means that this button brings you to our blog, where you can read more about what different maths abilities do for different types of children in terms of their development. So this app was co-produced with parents. In terms of that, we asked for their feedback. We asked what was important to them. They tried out the app and they found it really quick and easy to use. So, for example, parent feedback was that, you know, it's all about, it's a bank of ideas of things to do off screen, which one parent really liked. One other parent mentioned that they found that they were doing things that they would never have thought to do before, because it was really, you would think it's so simple, but then, you know, the child really enjoyed it. One other parent said that it fitted into spontaneous play really easily, and I was kind of ready for the app in advance and kind of pull things out of a bag and add them into what we were doing. And we were doing, sorry, I can't read the rest of the quote, doing anything different from just playing, and just fab. It encourages you to be interactive with your child, because obviously all the games are around, you know, how you can interact better with your child talking about maths. So this is the app at the moment. At the moment, I'm afraid the app is not available because we need to do more fundraising to make it available again on Apple, but I'm hoping that we'll be successful soon. However, a lot of the blog is still available, and a lot of the games are still available on our Facebook page. So it's still the same information, but in a slightly different format. In terms of educational apps, as I mentioned, we are currently doing a review of which educational apps work best. So we did a systematic review of all educational apps that are focusing on maths development in preschoolers up to the age of 7, so early development, but going up to age of 7, because we knew some of the studies were also carried out in Africa, where preschool starts much later. And so we found 50 studies that evaluated an app in terms of related to maths attainment. And 46 of them actually measured the mathematical outcomes for children as well, because there were some studies that were looking at a maths app but didn't really evaluate whether playing these games would actually raise children's maths attainment. If you look at these 46 studies, then 31 of the studies reported a favorable result, saying that the Maths app was indeed working. 11 had some kind of mixed results, and 4 reported no difference between the children who were playing the app and a control group, for example. So this to me suggests indeed that overall educational apps are positive for children and can raise their mathematical attainment. However, there are a lot of apps out there. If you go to, Apple or any kind of store that has app store that has all the apps in it. So one of the other things that we did is we did a QCA analysis, which is a qualitative comparative analysis to see which features of the app are most important. So, of course, all these apps were helping children to improve their mathematical outcomes, but we could look at, for example, features such as how about feedback? If the child gets feedback in the app, is that more important than, for example, playing the app with a parent? Or is it that the app having levels, different levels of difficulty, is that more important than getting feedback? So that's what a QCA analysis allows you to do. And what we found was that it's not just having feedback, because sometimes in an app you can have feedback that is motivational, keep going, you're doing well, or you can have explanatory feedback. That was wrong because you made a counting error, for example. So that's kind of explanatory feedback. And what we found was that it's the combination of explanatory and motivational feedback, as well as leveling. So that makes an app better at enhancing children's learning outcomes. So if you want, it's okay for children to play educational maths apps. They're likely, as we've seen, 31 out of 46 studies showed that there's an improvement by children playing educational maths apps. But if you want to know which app would be the best, it would be an app that has explanatory and motivational feedback in it. So the 3 apps that we found that were that have been evaluated, for which there's evidence that they raise children's mathematical attainment, it's an app of native numbers, Zorbit, and mathematics. So I kept this one very short so we have lots of time for discussion. So in terms of raising mathematical foundations for children, I hope I've shown that by using some very fun, hands-on games that kind of incorporate all children's senses in terms of, touch. We also had some games with music that I didn't talk about, but also with actions. Very short games, 5 to 10 minutes. Children's mathematical abilities improved. I also have shown that, to improve children's mathematical ability, especially in the early years, it's not just about counting, but if you improve children's number sense, so their understanding of how amounts, numbers relate to each other, as well as their estimation ability, it will improve children's overall mathematical outcomes. I hopefully have shown that leveling matters. I mean, it's been found in terms of the educational apps, but we also had leveling in terms of our preschool plus and digit games as well, because we knew that mattered, as well as the feedback that children receive. I know in our plus games, we didn't give counting feedback because we really wanted in that intervention to understand, how much would you improve children's mathematical abilities if you just develop the number sense compared to if you just develop counting and digital and digit knowledge. So that's why in our intervention with the preschoolers, we didn't give specific feedback, but obviously we know that feedback really helps children to improve even more in terms of their mathematical outcomes. So I just want to thank all of the people who've been involved with this research. It's been really multiple team efforts as well as the funders that have funded it, and I would really welcome any questions now.
Thanks, Jo. Again, very informative. Now, a lot of resources that I think people are definitely interested in getting their hands on. The first question that came up was from Mrs. Thompson. I don't know if you want to come in, Mrs. Thompson, if you're still there. And it was about using 0 in number games. I don't know if you're there. Nope. That's
Yeah,
okay.
find a question.
Yeah, so I've just found it. Yeah. I'm getting a wee bit of an echo.
Zeroing number games. Yes, so it depends on the age of the children, right? Zero is quite a difficult concept for children to understand in terms of, what it means. So we didn't particularly include that in our games at the time because we were focusing on 3 to 5 year olds. But it's quite easy to, just include it as well and see what children, do. So the games are very flexible. The idea how we developed these games was that if you then want to develop them, make them harder in terms of the numbers and quantities you make, you can, and then bring the games up to 6 to 7 year olds. So it's just about keeping to the core principles, basically, in terms of what feedback you give and that you don't go back to counting when children are playing an estimation game, for example.
I think there's quite a lot of interest in the app. And I know you were saying that the resources and a lot of the information is held on your Facebook page. So I think people are looking to know what your Facebook page is.
Yes, it's a very long. It's a long name because it's the Child Development and Learning Difficulties lab. So if you just give me a minute, I can do it later on, or I can send it maybe to you when the slides go out. Is that okay?
Yes. That would be perfect. And the other thing I think people were looking for was the PDFs of the, yeah.
I can definitely include that. And also actually for the Pleasant Digit games, we have a whole manual that we used, which I am very happy to share as well in terms of, people can use that. And it describes all the games in detail around what to do, what not to do. That might be useful.
Mm-hmm. Yep. I'm getting a wee bit of feedback again, I think. There seems to be something going on with Teams at the moment because people keep getting kicked out and coming back in. So I don't know what is actually happening. Okay, so what we'll do is we will send out the presentations with the PDFs and the links to the Facebook and the blogs for people, and then you'll get all that information. So is there any other questions for Jo while she is with us? Yep, we have our hands up. Steve, can we just bring you in?
Yeah, I always should be the first one to open my mouth, don't I? I'm just a big mouth scouser, I think. It's been really, really interesting being on these webinars, and I work in adult education, so I don't actually work with young children. However, we do work in deprived areas where the parents really do need some help with helping to develop their children. Is there any copyright issue with me using any of the stuff from your slides to develop a program or a talk for some of these parents in the deprived areas?
Oh, thanks very much, Steve, for your question. As long as you reference that this is based on my research, then I really don't mind at all of using that. There is no copyright on the games. There is on the app, but obviously that's why the app isn't out. But also, as I mentioned before, it might be useful to reach out to Save the Children, because we co-developed some materials specifically, and they've been evaluated to work for people in deprived areas, for parents to support their children in deprived areas with some very simple games, if that's helpful.
That's fantastic. Thank you.
Okay, I think we have, I'm just seeing everybody's asking for the resources.
Yeah, I think with the resource, and it's also very easy to develop these resources yourself. This is one of the points I think we've been trying to make for a while now, is to just use your environment and the toys you have at home to just, help children develop maths. Maths is not something that, needs to be developed by doing worksheets and just counting objects, but it's around, the vocabulary you use, estimation, subitizing, where it's more, in the kitchen, it's about weighing things, talking about numbers, what's 50 and what's 100, you got You got a camembert. Well, it's great for doing fractions, divided in half. How many people are in the house? In 4. Well, halves are not going to cut it. You'll have to cut some more and have quarters, and each can have a quarter. So it's kind of to just implement these short activities throughout daily life. If you're in the car, that's another thing we talk about. If you're in the car, there's so many things you can point out in terms of numbers. What is 30 miles? Later on, you might see 50 miles an hour. Which one is faster? 30, 50? I mean, so much of mathematical abilities, the maths around us, numbers around us, that children need to learn to use in their daily life. So
just for everybody, the PowerPoints will be sent out to everybody with the links and the resources. If you have missed the session 1 or 2, if you were at session 1 or 2, all of the presentations will be sent out after this session. So you will get them if you were at the sessions. However, if you weren't, don't worry, because we are creating a space on the National Improvement Hub with the filming, the resources and the PowerPoints. So you won't miss out. I promise you that. We do have a wee question from Shan. I don't know if you want to come in and ask the question around New Zealand maths and maths recovery. I don't know if you're there, Shan?
Yeah, I'm here.
Hi, Shan.
Yeah, I was just wondering, I really like using New Zealand maths and maths recovery, and I was just wondering if you're aware of kind of any research around the effectiveness of that. And also,
can you explain New Zealand maths? What that is?
So it's a program that New Zealand developed, and everything's kind of very hands-on, and there's a big focus on developing number sense. So in Highland, it was quite widely used a few years ago, I think, and it's quite kind of. I think quite a lot of it's based on maths recovery as well.
Yeah, I'm not. There with maths development, there's a lot out there, and
yeah.
So I haven't particularly looked at New Zealand maths in terms of it. Based upon the research from what we've worked with, is that very often the programs before 2012, when we were developing our plus and digit games, they were either focusing a lot on counting and cardinality and kind of digit transcribing, but not so much around, how do you use maths, the things that are in your environment. And obviously mathematical abilities are things you do in your daily lives. It's about cooking, it's about being on time, it's about catching the right bus, recognizing which bus number you need to be, etc. So these are practical skills, and therefore we designed these games also because of, in our own research that was based on surveys, we found that the preschool providers often thought that maths is something that needs to be done only during carpet time, or then the other extreme was like, well, we do maths. That's what they told us. We do maths. We have a home corner where there's some money and they can play with it. And that was kind of like the other extreme, but that alone will not support children maths development. So it's kind of like, that's why we developed these games. It's kind of show them that you don't have to do much really, but there's all these kind of different activities that you can do around counting, digit cognition, number sense, being hands-on, and also showing children that it's not just objects you can count, it's actions, it's sounds, that all of these things are countable. Does that help, Sean? Sorry about that. Don't really answer your question, but
yeah, I think it helps with the kind of activities or materials that you can use. That's really helpful. And my other question was, there were some picture books in the presentation with kind of hidden numbers in them. I was just wondering what they were.
Sorry, they're on a link. I don't know them on the top of my head because we used a lot of them, but I do talk about them in the blog around maths and stories, which will be circulated as it was part of the pre-reading for the first session, I think. Yes.
Shan,
I didn't see it though.
Shan, please feel free to share any resources that you have as well in the chat panel from the New Zealand resources.
Yeah, I'll put the website link on.
Yeah, that would be good. I'm sure everybody would be interested in that. Okay, so the pre-reading has become post-reading. Jo, just due to the time that it came in. So Kirsty, I don't know if you wanted to come in. You were asking about the Save the Children programme.
Yes, the Save the Children program is the Families Connect program that they have. So in the Families Connect program, there are 2 sessions entirely based around improving mathematical abilities. And we've divided it into, one is around counting and symbolic recognition, and the other one is about number estimation and the number line. So the 2 core areas of mathematics. But there's also a big focus on helping parents recognize how mathematical vocabulary and language is important. So to help parents who might be coming from different cultural backgrounds or have a different language at home as well. Thanks, Steve, for pointing out pizza slicing is good for fractions. I didn't mention this today, but yeah, I think one of the things that might be confusing for children is often when we teach them fractions is we sometimes use concrete objects or entities. And that that gives children a headache, right? Because if you say, well, let's divide 5, and then in groups of 2, which means that, but you can't. Whereas if you give them things like pizzas or cheese, camembert, or anything like that, then they can learn what really half is without having the headache of, but what if things are not, can't be divided, for example. So this is why pizza and camemberts are good for these kind of activities. There was a question, I think, around subitizing, why it's so important for building maths. Yes, and Vida, that's a very good point in terms of subitizing is very important. We do know this. And this is, I mentioned this before, there's nothing wrong with children using their fingers when they're younger to kind of get an understanding of what's 5, what's 5 really, and how does that relate to 4 and 3, and very quickly it really helps their development. There are actually a number of school programs though that are based on it. So actually Numicon in itself is also a little bit based on subitizing, because children start to make the association between, the different shapes of the Numicons and how that might represent number. So it's that kind of linking the visuospatial element as well as the number element. There's another system, I've forgotten what it's called. I call it the bus system, but it's again where children learn very quickly. It's a visual representation. In a way, an abacus is also teaching children to subitize, because it's kind of recognizing how many lines and what it is. So it's all about, linking the visuospatial aspect or the visual aspect, the representation, to what the meaning might be.
Eva's come in with a suggestion as well around counting collections being a great way to develop number sense. I don't know if you want to elaborate on that, Eva, if you're there still.
Yes, I am here. Hi, I'm in Highland, so and I know Sian. So we've been working on maths recovery, New Zealand maths for a long time, but the development officers also introduced counting collections to us a few years ago. And I think they're absolutely fabulous. It's the children just sort. I mean, you know what I'm talking about. So it's using everyday objects. Your pastas, your pencils, your everything, and they count huge numbers even at infant stages, far beyond the numbers that most teachers give them. So that's you think, oh, primary ones that you can only count to 10, and primary 2s, but actually they can go up to hundreds, and they will quite happily sit and count, and then you give them objects to put things into, and they themselves sort them, and they work together, and they take turns. And I just think that it's a fabulous way of developing number sense and the enjoyment, and they just love it. I think it's great.
That's great, yeah. It seems like there's a lot of overlap indeed with some of our counting games there, where it's about children doing it together. And indeed, when we ask children to count at the beginning. These children could count, but they were not quite clear, to 5 to 10. But over those 5 weeks, children, there was no limit to them anymore in terms of their counting range went up quite a lot. But I think there's important things. It's the fact that doing it together, making it fun, it's with objects, so there's some kind of representation to it. And that's sometimes, I think, what is missing in terms of, mathematical development is moving away from the paper and pencil or from the right and wrong, but just having fun. Hence why Lego is also a good way of improving mathematical abilities.
Yes, bring the fun back, especially when you're looking at activities in the home, for parents and children learning together, making it a fun activity. They're going to want to get involved in it, aren't they? As opposed to it being, oh my goodness, I've got to do homework, or oh my goodness, but actually making it baking a cake, thinking about the measurements, and then you've got a lovely cake at the end of it.
Especially also the games where we got good feedback were also the ones from outdoors, for example, where we asked children to go and find selections of things, especially now it's autumn, go and find 5 conkers. Oh, and what if you find 3 acorns, and then which one is more, which one is less? It doesn't take much. The kids are outside, they're walking, and yet they're doing maths at the same time, but they don't know it. They're going on treasure hunts and just comparing the different treasure hunts they have.
Interestingly, we were just chatting at the start of the session, and the Royal Botanica Gardens in Edinburgh is working with a family learning worker, and it is all about outdoor learning and making use of the outdoors, but there is a learning outcome. Because they do count different sticks, measure the sticks, what stick is longer, that kind of thing. We have a session at the end of this month around that. So I'm really pleased that's a nice wee segue.
Great, no, that's good. Indeed, there's other things and other games that children find fun is, measure things in hands or in feet, and as they used to do in the past, a long time ago. And, that's what children find fascinating too.
We've got another wee question from Shan, I think.
Yeah. So the stuff that the Botanic Gardens in Edinburgh is producing, is that going to go towards a resource that's available?
Yes. Sorry. Yes, sorry, they are producing resources for outdoor learning. So the session, we're just putting the session up just now. So the session itself is going to be at the end of this month. We can certainly share that. It will be on the events page. And they've already been working with families. So they're just going to showcase the impact that they've had, some of the activities that they've been using, and then there'll be like a kind of bank of resources for people to take away. So if you are interested, then please look out for the on the events page.
Is that the events page of the Botanic Gardens? Or
no, Education
Scotland. Okay.
Yes. If you're interested, I can certainly send it to you separately.
That would be great. I tend to get a bit lost otherwise.
No problem. We'll get so many websites and wakelets, and it's a bit confusing. No problem at all. I think it will be a really interesting session. So I think we've probably got time for one more question if anyone has any, and then Maria might bring you in just to highlight. Oh, there it's there. That's it. That's the events page there. Well done, Beverly. Maria, you've shared some resources from Education Scotland that you might want to talk to. So has anyone got any more questions?
I also want to say that people will have my email address on the slide. So if there's anything they need or any further materials or want to develop their own materials, I'm always happy to be involved with anything in terms of creating new resources. So let me know.
That would be amazing. Thank you, Jo. Maria, do you want to?
Yeah, I won't take up time because I know I'm probably standing in place of people's tea or evening walk, but it was just, an opportunity to talk just and to raise awareness of those 2 sites that I put in the chat, probably further up, you'll need to scroll back. One of them is in the National Improvement Hub, and it just kind of hosts all the new resources that we've made over the last sort of year and a half, and a lot of them absolutely fit in with the messages that Jo has been speaking to us about over the last kind of 3 sessions, with that idea of the importance of estimating and the development of number sense at every level, but we're talking, I suppose, today at kind of early level, and also our PLC page, which is just a growing body of resource, all with the focus of numeracy and maths. So it was really just to highlight to people that there will be an abundance of resources and support there also. So yeah, I won't take up any more time, Susan, but thank you. And thank you, Jo.
Thanks, Maria. And we will be sending out, as I said before, the presentations and the resources that people have asked of Jo, and the links to her Facebook and the blogs. So please don't worry about that. We will get that information out to you. I would just really personally like to thank you, Jo, for your time and your expertise. The 3 sessions have been wonderful. The feedback has been really amazing. So I would love us to continue this relationship, perhaps revisit this in a few months, just to see how people got on with some of the resources that you're sharing, to see how the implementation of those might have gone, and for you to get some feedback on that might be quite interesting.
Yeah, very much so. And also, if people want to evaluate their own practices, there's also things we can help with, giving a pre and a post test that we've used, so you can actually measure the difference as well. We're always happy to help practitioners with that.
Perfect. So I'll thank you very much. I don't know if you've got anything that you wanted to end on.
No, thank you very much. It's great. Also, I'll definitely look into New Zealand maps and the oral counting and the counting collection. I've written them all down, so that's great. I'm learning as well.
Yes, yeah. Well, that's it. We're all learning, aren't we? New things come up, and that's what these sessions are for us all to share the knowledge that we have. So thank you again, Jo, and thank you to everyone else for sharing your time with us, and enjoy the rest of your night.
Thanks very much, everybody. Speak soon. Bye.